On today's show, everybody, John Vosler. Of all the upcoming retreats at Imiloa, John is one of my favorite upcoming retreat hosts. It's true. He's a yoga instructor, a meditator, and he says that being is the underlying nature of your reality. He combines meditation, movement, holistic body work, and conscious coaching. He resides usually in the City of Angels, although I think he's traveling today. And, you know, all these things, meditation, expert, teacher, residing in Los Angeles, all things you would expect from the youngest son of an Iowa funeral director, John Vosler. All things you would expect. Do you like that intro? It's the best intro of a podcast you've been on, you got to admit.
I have to admit, true.
Where in the world are you? It's Taiwan, right? You're in Taiwan?
Yes, I'm in Taipei today. Yes,
Taipei.
I am.
And what are you doing? Just, curious George over here. Why are you in Taipei?
Well, I'm en route to Bali, where I'm going to lead 2 retreats for the month of June. But I normally take a little holiday or a little vacation to prep, and so I came to Taipei because it's close, and also to be in a city that I've never been in. It's quite a remarkable city. I highly recommend it to anyone that travels. But yeah, it's just a little R&R before I head off, and I'm taking 2 groups through Bali in the month of June.
So this is not how I was expecting to start this thing out, but I am so curious because we talked a little bit when you were at Imiloa, and you are probably one of the, I don't know, hardest working, most frequently working retreat host or transformational leader or educator, as in you're based in LA, but you're always traveling somewhere. I'm curious, after doing this for so many years, 20 years, I think, if I remember, what is the secret to like staying balanced in all of this movement? Like, how do you actually center yourself as you're doing all of this teaching all around the world all the time?
It's a great question, Jake. I think mostly for me, it's my practices. It's the practice of movement. It's the practice of Yoga Nidra. And these are the practices that sustain me and also just give me capacity for when I travel. I love what I do. I love the field of transformation. I love people. I love being with people when they discover who they really are, that underlying essence of being. It feeds my soul, and I kind of ride that energy as often as I can wherever I can go.
I love that. Okay, great. And it's also, I sense that it's also alignment. Like, it's what happens when you're aligned. I think a lot of transformational leaders watch Imiloa and they learn, like junior folks who are just starting out or think that they have something to share or teach. They look to people like you and they're like, oh, how does that work? Mm-hmm. Alignment, it sounds like. I mean, that's what it sounds like when you share. Yeah.
Yeah. And alignment's the right word too. I would say that, like, once you know, and you know this, Jake, once you've connected to that brings passion and love, and also it feeds you, but you're also in service of others. You must feed yourself first, right? And sometimes we go to others to feed them, to illuminate ourselves. But in essence, when that alignment occurs, there is something that's so magical. And it doesn't mean you're not going to get tired. You're not going to get pissy, gripey, and grumpy, because that's part of the human existence. But there's this backdrop or this undercurrent of source that just allows you to have capacity you don't even know you have. And then you drop in it and it leads.
Mm-hmm. This is perfect. This is where I wanted to go. So I wanted to discuss this idea of true calling. When I met you at Imiloa, I got this sense when I met you, John, that this guy is in a authentic life path. And for those, who are listening, it's important to sync up with who you choose to learn from. Like, a lot of people who are looking for retreats and discovering new transformational leaders that hosted Imiloa, it's important to know who it is they are. What were the mile markers on your journey that led you to really recognizing the path that you're on now? The early mile markers that could have put you in one direction or another?
I guess for me, when I started, I kind of dipped in the field of body work, and I started working with people individually with their physical bodies. And I think that was the first doorway for me when I recognized that we can do so much with the physical body, but sometimes it's just easier to go to the more formless aspect or the more subtle aspect of ourselves. And in the practice of Yoga Nidra, you're dropping into a more subtle state of being where you start to access parts of yourself that you might not even connect with. You're dropping again beneath the mind that tells the story that you're something that you're not. And when you drop beneath that mind and you start to really feel the energy, it starts to guide you. It does take me back, and I'm going to digress for a minute. It takes me back, as you said in the opening, about growing up in a funeral home. And my dad was a funeral director, and for many years we lived in the funeral home. And a
Did
lot
you
of those
really? You lived
yeah,
in the funeral home?
yeah, we lived upstairs, but we lived we lived above the funeral home. And so our playground was the casket hall where you could buy your caskets, the chapel, the top of the building.
I mean,
But
do you have stories that you've never told anybody about, like things that you've seen that you just haven't told anybody that you might tell me today?
yeah. Let me just put it this way. I've seen things that at that point in time I believed, but sometimes I think back and like, did that really happen?
For
You know,
example?
yeah, well, when you were a child, everything, the veil's free. You're not blocked by anything of the mind. You're just a child. So you can see you can see things energetically that you might not see as adult. Like I just remember when I was first in growing up there, that there was an energy around things, right? There was a felt sense of energy, not something you can to literally see, but you could feel it. There's a felt sense of energy that is we would call the field, that was so prevalent around death that no one really talked about. Everybody's there mourning and in loss and grief, but there's such a frequency. You're so close. That person that's leaving is so close to the formless nature. You have the privilege of being in that, the honor of being in that energy, of that transformation, of that transition. That's one of the most remarkable things you'll ever experience, whether you're birthing someone into life or someone's leaving this life. Those two windows are the closest to your source you'll ever be. And that was felt when I was living there.
Wow, this is so cool. What age? I mean, I got to talk about this. So, what age were you living upstairs at the funeral home?
Well, we lived there when I was 4, 5, and 6, and then
Wow.
towards 7 years old. So those are very informative years for me. But then we continued to go back because my dad was in the business for, I believe, about 18 years. So it was sort of a foundational place that we would go and be there and work there and hang out there.
And did you ever ask, like, your dad, did you ever I don't know what your relationship with him was like, but did you ever ask him what moved him to do this type of work?
It's another really good question. You're really good at this.
This is what I do, John Vosler.
I noticed that. I guess for me, what I recognize with my dad was empathy. My dad is, and I have a very good relationship with him. He mirrored to me empathy, compassion, and love, and he could hold space like no man I know. And so I think there's a part of him. It's his Christian base, his background of just faith that gave him that permission just to hold space for someone when they struggled and were challenged. And I truly believe that's where, for me, I tapped into that eternal empathy, one might call it, where you really do have the ability just to hold space while someone goes through something that's so traumatic. And it was a gift. I mean, there were times where that wasn't a gift, where your dad was the guy that everybody was going to die with. It's just like not a comfortable thing. Everybody knew my dad. But one of the things that I was blessed with is to see just how powerful it was to be still and to be quiet and just to listen and to give space for whatever is going to unfold in front of you. And Jake, that's what I do now on retreat, right? Well, that's what we do. We hold space and we listen and we have the stillness in our experience.
This is what I'm just reflecting on because, I've talked to a lot of folks and a lot of different retreat hosts, and just finding out these, like I mentioned in our conversation earlier, like these mile markers. And it makes me really question, and I haven't thought about it before our conversation right now, but it really makes me question about this idea of what is destiny versus, there's all these conversations about, like, are you born to experience something? Was it predetermined? And then I think about like nurture and how you were raised. You were raised in this environment where people are, the veils are so thin, and there they are in their transition. And now as an adult for the past few decades, you're literally walking with people on their transition, sometimes to awakening, I assume other things as well. And then your dad kind of being the foundation of compassion through that. It's like, were you destined to do this, or were you just around it at such an informative time and you just listened to the whispers or to the calling, or was there a calling? Do you have a sense of that?
Well, I reflect back again. I was raised in Iowa. That was where I was raised. So my choice was mortuary business or fertilizer. So farming or the mortuary business. So there are those choices that you make. But do I think I was predetermined? I think something was living me that gave me permission to be me based on the experiences of being me then. I know that's a cluster to follow, but there is something to say about the experiences as a child that I witnessed that formed me as the man that I am. And I give total props and grace to my family and my dad and those experiences that do allow me to have that capacity to be with people that you love. My partner and I just lost a dear friend right before we left for Taiwan. And whew, and one of the challenges I think we all have is we don't allow ourselves to experience the sadness and the grief and the loss because we're so busy like holding on that we wish it didn't happen. And what I learned as a child is like, you have no control over any of this, that your life is flow. And yeah, at one day you and the form will actually dissolve and the energy will go on. And when you get that felt sense, that freedom of letting go, that there's something beyond your control, that life is actually living you, you get to begin to live your life. And I think that's also why I was so drawn to Yoga Nidra, because Yoga Nidra, again, it's like sleep, but you're conscious and awake. You literally die every time you do a Yoga Nidra. You go through all of the form to the formless, from the form of the body to the formless state of the causal field. And the more that you do that, the more comfortable you are with the transition into the formless, to death itself. And I don't know if that all worked together, but that's how it all kind of came together.
I love to talk about the roots of things, and that is your practice and the practice that you're going to bring to Imiloa, Yoga Nidra. I'd love to understand the history and the root of the practice. Can you share that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a tantric practice. And, sometimes we don't talk about it being a tantric practice because, again, many times when you hear the word tantric, you think of like sex and lasciviousness.
Especially when white people are talking about it, John Vosler.
Honestly, and that's the truth. I mean, this is an ancient practice. I've been studying or dabbling in Kashmir Shaivism, and some of these teachings about, the tantric practices are all about God is in everything. God is in the computer, God's in you, God's in me, God's in my glasses, God's in everybody behind the screen. And then once we start to honor that everything is a representation of source, there's much more of a reverence to it. Reverence to your own life for the opportunity to be embodied and experience that wisdom. And I think that yoga, again, means union with the divine, and nidra means sleep. But again, as I often say, it's not the sleep that you go to bed at night where you're unconscious. This is where you're awake and aware while the body sleeps, which means, Jake, that when you go out into the world of form and you start to look around, you're awake. You know what's real and what's unreal. And you begin to live your life knowing that. And I think that the practice itself is a very old practice. And it's a practice, I think, that if anybody who is uncomfortable with meditation, seated, your back hurts, I don't like doing it, this is you basically being guided through an experience of body, mind, heart, soul, and then beyond. And it's so easy. And you start to recognize, as I said before, that formless nature, that source that you are. And it's powerful. I mean, it's transformed my life, to be honest with you. And everywhere I go and everyone I meet and retreat, it's literally what people come back for more and more and more is as that practice and the doing less so that you can experience being more.
The retreats that do the best at Imiloa are often the most simple ones. Like Yoga Nidra, I remember we talked about it when you were at Imiloa, and it's like, it's a relatively simple practice. And yet when you put it into the perspective of like it's death happening, or it's like you going through the experience of death, form to formless, it's so simple, and yet it's such a beautiful practice. It's so universal, and it probably teaches people. I imagine people come to your retreats. Maybe you can share with me. People are probably attracted to your retreats who are going through all sorts of different things. Obviously, they're not just interested in coming to sleep on a retreat. They're probably processing something and think that Yoga Nidra is the path to be able to understand it better. Yeah?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a spectrum, though. I would say there are people that come to deal with loss, disruption, fear, divorce, change in life. And then the other spectrum is people who are coming to be opening their creativity. They want to write, paint. They want to write or paint or experience more creativity in their life because all of it's tapped into the same place. And what's in the way of that tap in is all the stories and the beliefs that you've imprinted in you that keep you from experiencing that source energy that is always guiding you. And as you said before, I really like the way you say it. It's like, it's just that silence where there's a little whisper that's always there. But when it's so noisy and you're so full of thoughts, it's so difficult to hear that whisper. And in that silent whisper is everything. It's the wisdom that you seek. It's the wisdom that you already are. So there really isn't a seeking. It's just being with that whisper.
Yeah, I really appreciate the reframe on that. It's also for people that are looking to unlock something or creativity, because I think that I was really thinking of it as like, oh, it's great for transition or someone going through something or whatever, or someone who needs rest or deep relaxation. But there is no better place than the present to be able to unlock massive amounts of creativity. And how much faster are you going to get into presence than with a Yoga Nidra practice? I mean, come on. Yeah.
Right. And it's the present moment. It's the only place it can happen. Let's be straight up, right? I mean, it's the only place it can happen is the present moment. And Yoga Nidra aligns you to that present moment. It's not like you have to do anything to be present. You just have to be present and experience it as it is. But yes.
One of the things that you say is that many people who you meet around the world struggle with authenticity and stress and trying to people please and people fix, or trying to make up for what they feel that they lack. But that instead of something bad, this actually could be the doorway to one's authentic true nature. When did you recognize perhaps how inauthentic you were and how you moved toward your authentic true nature?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in there, Jake. How much time do we have?
I mean, I know I kind of projected and said that you were inauthentic, but I'll raise my hand first and say guilty as charged.
Yeah, I'm guilty. Are they all laughing there with you right now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Guilty as charged as well. I think that a lot of it too is, the challenges you the challenges that you face are what make you who you are. And sometimes I think we get lost in the obstacles and we don't recognize that they're actually the opportunities. And many times I think we have these beliefs, we have these actually behaviors where, like, if I make you happy, then I don't have to be uncomfortable with my unhappiness. If I fix you, then it feels like I'm important. We have all these behaviors that we do also.
Wow. That's I mean, I know you're kind of flying through those, but those are two very powerful points. If I fix you, then I'm important. And then what was the other one that you said?
Well, here's the thing. I want to acknowledge myself. So if I do something for someone else, that makes me feel special. Or if I fix you, then I feel special, right? But it's all coming from a lack, Jake. Sometimes I think we don't recognize how much of how do I want to say that? How much of our life is filling the silent space with words so that we're not with the uncomfortableness of not being liked, or we're not being with the uncomfortableness of feeling. And many times in my own personal experience, let me just say this. I was so busy trying to help everyone and make sure everybody was taken care of that, people could experience what they were experiencing, but to the detriment of myself, right? It's that thing where we all do it. We want to make sure everybody else is okay, because then they don't have to ask me if I'm okay, because I don't even know if I'm okay, because I don't even know who I am.
Wow. I mean,
does that make sense?
It's pretty mind-blowing when you really feel the words that you're saying. It's actually pretty mind-blowing.
And it's a lot of defense. That's the other thing I would just reveal to you. So there's a lot of things that happened to us when we were children, and many of us have stories, and some of those things that happen to us are actually what helps us live and thrive in our lives, right? So they inform our experiences. But some of those things that happened when we were a child in the past aren't really informing the moment. They're actually limiting us. I use this example sometimes as sort of, the more I can make someone feel good about themselves, the less that they're going to, again, as I said before, they're going to focus on me. And that's because I didn't want to focus on me, because I wasn't feeling good about me. So it was a deflection. So if I can make you feel good and I can take care of you, then I don't have to do my work. I don't have to do my work because I'm doing it. I'm helping you. But the true reflection here is the more that I help myself and the more I can really connect to my true essence, then me just being with you mirrors that to you. There's nobody that's broken, Jake. There's nobody that needs fixing. So the minute we pull our energy off of like, oh, that person's broken, I'm going to have to help fix them. Or, if you look at it like everybody's already whole and complete, and they're just the representation of the source, and what they're experiencing in their life is their embodied wisdom, and they're here to work through it. Well, then there's nothing for any of us to do but be with each other. And presence is revealed.
Wow, this is good.
I'm feeling like I'm moving a mile a minute.
Well,
Yeah.
you move a mile a minute because then I get to just slow us down and be in the isness because it's taking me a minute, but I'm sure if it's taking me a minute, it's taking people who are listening some time. So it's all good. You move, I'll help us pace. We're doing great, you and me, John Vosler.
I appreciate you. Dave. I appreciate you. I appreciate you because also the energy, that you have. I'm just going to go here. So when I first met you,
yeah, tell me what happened. Tell me what happened.
I was reflecting in myself, you and me together. Like I felt the energy of like how you were is how I was, and how much me doing was what I needed to experience so that I could be somebody. Like this idea that there was so much energy. And one of the things that I loved about you is as we began to have relationship together and communicate, both of us, we both dropped in and we both became present. But what met each other first was our personality, our energy, our excitement. But really at the core of who we are is this uncaused love, this stillness. And that even in the moments we were at Imiloa, we were sitting there, there was nothing being said between us, but yet we were communicating. So that's the spectrum, right? We may meet someone and put on this persona because we want to make sure they like us, or we want to make sure that we don't upset them, as opposed to, I'm just going to show up with you, Jake, just like we did, man. We just showed up for each other. And all of a sudden, coming together like that just dropped us both in. And I think the authenticity part, this is what I want to come back to, is there's this part of us that when we're still and we're connected, authenticity is just blooming. And when we become that feeling of not being authentic, it's because we're trying to seek approval or to be seen a certain way or projecting or trying to control that we cannot control. We can't control any of that. We think we can, but it's really the presence of being with one another that's by divine grace that allows us just to be as we are. And whatever unfolds in that moment, we're present to it, Jake. We don't have to fill the space full of stuff. We do in the beginning when we meet people, right? We're like, hey, how are you? What's going on? Hey, great blue shirt. Love that beard. We do all this BS, which is not BS, but just sort of that I'm trying to be comfortable. You're trying to be comfortable, as opposed to, Jake, how's the moment? Let's just hang out here, is what we did. And I love that when we were together and we spent more and more time together. We both dropped in. Mm-hmm. Our authenticity ruled.
It was a shared co-creation because, as we know, it takes two to tango in most situations, especially that, because the minute someone is like uncomfortable with that, it's over. Like, and then the performative nature starts or whatever it is. You said at the beginning when on that about becoming somebody, or that you saw yourself maybe in me when you were a bit younger, not that you're that much older. And when I was in India recently, which you know about, doing a Panchakarma, I was reconnected to, because I had my phone only an hour a day, so I had to download a bunch of podcasts on like slow Indian internet. It was phenomenal. And so I would download Ram Dass's old podcasts from the 60s and 70s when he was traveling back and forth to India. And one of the things, I think this was actually the name of his book too, but it was a topic in a lot of the podcasts, was that he had to become somebody in order to realize that he was nobody. And he was talking about the kids of the 60s and 70s, presumably in the psychedelic movement and all this, how the kids of this new spiritual movement, again, from the 60s and 70s, they're all trying to become nobody before they've even tried to become somebody. It's almost as if, and I just feel that so much even now, looking at all the different kind of people in the woo-woo world of transformation, everybody trying to get to this Zen, here I am, Om Shanti Shanti, I am all that is, blah, 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 when they haven't even actually taken out their ego for a run around the track. They haven't really failed at something horribly again and again and again, where they have to go through that, and that there's just such wisdom to also becoming somebody, to realize that you're actually nobody. That's actually that's how I heard Ram Dass and what he was saying in the 60s. But I wonder, have you had similar experiences? I mean, bringing people through as many journeys as you have and as many retreats as you have, to go from being somebody to becoming nobody. What's been your journey there?
Well, it's funny. Personally speaking, I'm just going to tell you a quick story. So, I was an actor for many years.
General Hospital? Weren't you on General Hospital?
Yes, I was on General Hospital. And that was the story I was going to tell you. So, trying to be an actor is like, again, trying to be an actor. And that's literally rushing to wait to experience an anticlimactic moment on TV. I mean, let's be straight up. But what I was seeking the whole time, Jake, was I was seeking myself. I was trying to play characters other than myself because I didn't know myself. So my ego took me on this ride like, you need to be an actor because then you'll be seen. Not necessarily for who you really are, but you're going to be seen. So being on the set that day, I just remember I had filmed a commercial the night before for Wells Fargo, and it was a great commercial, and I was so excited, but we didn't finish until almost 3 a.m. And so then I had to call the next morning at General Hospital. It was like 6 o'clock to call. And I got there, and then they handed me new sides. And I was like, and when you're under stress and you're not doing Yoga Nidra, your brain cannot retain very well. And so they gave me new sides, and I was just like reading it over. And
new sides is like a new script.
Oh, my bad. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And so they came in the dressing room like, hey, the schedule's bumped up. We're going to put your scene before the next scene. So would you just come out and wait? And I remember going out onto the set, and one of the stars on the show was having an outburst, yelling and screaming. And now my nervous system is spiked. And I could feel myself being so uncomfortable. I can't retain now. I don't know where I am. And then they just say, okay, we're going to go and roll. Let's get that guy off the stage. And they put me on the stage. And the line that kept screwing, I can't even believe I'm telling you this, but the line that kept screwing me up was the man, this guy, hold on. He has a black pair of pants on and there's white pills in. And I would say, the man with the white trousers has the black pills in him. And it was just like, what? Cut! You're like, oh my God, did I screw up? And now the anxiety starts to build. And I mean, you can put this in your own personal life.
Totally.
Tired,
you start sweating. Yeah.
Makeup comes and does the whole thing. Let's roll it. Okay. And the whole line, I did all the other lines great, but I got down to that one line and I'm like, yes, it's the man with the white pants and has black pills in his pocket. And they're like, cut. And like the third time is not your charm on a stage. And all of a sudden the director comes down, the producer, the casting director, like, are you okay? And then the extra people have slid a napkin next to you that says, just breathe. You've got this.
You've got this.
And you're just like, I'm just spiraling. And I just remember at that moment, I'm like, why am I doing this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I ended up, they dropped the boom. I ended up saying the line. I was never asked back.
Wow.
To that show. And it was one of those moments of reflection. I look back and be like, are you sure this is really meant for me? Why am I doing this? And to make a long story quicker, I got cast in news radio, went to the set that next morning or a couple mornings later. I was there from 6 a.m. until midnight. Got in the car and drove home and said, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this. This is not who I am. I'm seeking validation outside of myself to feel whole and complete, and I'm not doing any of the inner work. And that was the click.
I mean, it's a great click, and I have to say there's nothing worse than when I would go to LA. Actually, you're still living there, but when I would go to LA and I was just starting out in television as well, I just, and I was hustling and meeting agents and all these things. Nothing worse than getting into a cab. At that point, it was a cab, not an Uber, with like a 60-something-year-old actor who's like pitching himself to you. And I'm like the new kid on the block who might have a show in development at ABC or whatever it was, the du jour, right? And I'm like, I remember thinking in the back of that cab, it was one particular guy. And I was like, I do not want to be this individual. Not that he was a bad person, and not that following his dreams was not an important thing and a beautiful thing, but the lack of inner work that I felt unconsciously, I didn't want to go down a road where I was seeking it. Just like you, I didn't want to go down a road where I was seeking that level of adoration from others without actually doing the work inside. I'm so grateful you shared that story. Not to mention, soap operas are a hell of a thing because isn't it like an episode a day? You're like it's a half-hour show every day, and like you're having to it's an insane. Just keep it on that assembly line. When people rest, I want to transition back to your retreat, John. When people rest, when they really rest, what becomes possible for them? What have you seen with clients who have come on your retreat, people who have come back again and again? what becomes possible for them as they, take time on a retreat?
The most important thing I see out there is that people don't realize that they're tired, that they need to rest. They have been taught that rest is a vulnerability, a weakness. And I think that's such a light bulb. And I think one of the things that you recognize when your body rests, you have a clearer mind. And then that download or that wisdom starts to come through you. If you're not rested, the level of stress you have puts you in that fight or flee or that constant doing of activity. And all you're doing, I say this quote all the time, it's you can't solve the problem from the same mind or consciousness that created it. It's the Einstein quote. And so many people, like on the second day of the retreat, after they've had a couple of yoga nidras and some breath work, all of a sudden they're just like, wow, I'm exhausted. And I had no idea. They had just been running. And in that moment, I think is a jewel, because in that moment, first of all, there's a reflection point of who they were before they got to that retreat and what's possible now that they're rested. So if you're working on, a relationship or interpersonal relationship stuff, that you might have a different insight about it. Or if you're looking for more creativity or those types of things, all of a sudden that doorway opens. But none of that doorway is going to open if you're not rested. And I think, once you have a couple of moments where you're resting in Yoga Nidra, and I can't wait to be in Imiloa, because what I found there was the combination of nature, the sacredness of that jungle, and the support and love you have with the people. It makes you feel safe so that you can rest. And the last thing I would just say is the more that you rest, the more capacity you have to actually be that full of expression of who you are. Not trying to please people or get stuff done, but like actually be yourself. And all of a sudden it feels like something, the mystery of life is living you, and life becomes playful and fun and joyful and exciting. But that doesn't mean you're still not going to have happy and crappy. You're still going to have all of the dimensions of emotions, but you have the capacity because you're rested. Your nervous system's balanced. There's a sense of calmness that kind of moves through you. And as I said before, I lost a dear friend just last week, and people kept saying, well, how are you doing? How are you doing? And I'm like, you know what? Sadness and griefs are rising in a field of it's just uncaused love. So there's a calmness behind it all, the backdrop. But in the foreground, yeah, I was super sad. I was experiencing all sorts of ranges of emotion, just like you do in life and just like you will do on the retreat. Because retreat gives you that practice, that opportunity where you're not being pulled out into the world and have to go back to your wife and husband, unless you bring them on retreat. We'll work with you individually. But you're not going back to your life. So you have that capacity to be in Imiloa, right? And resting in nature and resting in divine grace and doing yoga nidras, where everything starts to slow down so that you can have different relationships with that's arising in your foreground. Whether that's your thought, your relationship, your job, any of those things. It just shifts your perspective about everything. You leave that retreat with an intention of how you want to live, how you want to be. And you create these intentions to start to realign your energy, as you said before, back into that source so that you're connected by it. And the more the practice of Yoga Nidra, with the incredible deep dive of that Yoga Nidra, the more you'll be aligned with that. Oh. So sleep's powerful. Rest is powerful.
I mean, do you hear some of the shit that you say? Like, it's
no,
really, I don't think you hear any of it.
I channel this stuff. You know what I mean? Listen, it's not me. I'll be straight up with you. I feel fortunate enough to say this, and I'm going to say this on this podcast. I just feel like it's downloaded through me. And sometimes I make my own notes and like, okay, I'm going to add this to my practice. Because a lot of this, I just feel like it's channeled through me. I know that's as kumbaya as it's going to get here. But sometimes I will go back and listen to that and be like, dude, this is good. Now sit down and do your practice. Like, let's take that and unpack that.
Yeah, because you said something, and I'm going to go back and listen to it in the recording, but it was life living or being lived by life, the mystical side of being lived by life.
Yeah.
And I was like,
mystery of life is living you.
The mystery of life is living you. That is such a state of surrender, but also wholeness. That is such a powerful state. It resonates very deeply. Yeah, The mystery of life is living you. And it kind of gets you out of the driver's seat, even though you are everything. in that.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's good.
Well
it's good. So for those of you who are listening, have you ever felt that you really need to rest? I know for me, I was talking about it earlier when I went to India. I did not realize how exhausted I was until I did that Panchakarma. 21 days of doing nothing, and still I was exhausted and sleeping 10 hours a night. That's actually true. Like you were saying, people on the second day of the retreat for you, people don't realize how exhausted. Like if you're listening to this and you live in any Western society, you probably have a level of adrenal fatigue that you don't even recognize. John, I was doing nothing in India for 21 days straight, and I was still sleeping 10 hours a night, exhausted every day. Insane. Insane. I think you've touched on it, but can you kind of go through, well, you actually haven't touched on the days of the retreat. So thinking about what people will gain, experience, and learn in the context of the flow of the 5 days at Imiloa. Can you speak a little bit to that?
I'd love to. So again, the way the retreat is set out is that you're going to come in, and the first of the retreat is about what we just talked about, is the nervous system and how to restore it. And by doing this practice, it balances your nervous system. You just get a restoration aspect of the practice. And to recognize, I like to reflect, like notice how you are now so we can reflect at the end on how you are then. But the first day is really about restoration. And the second day is really about creating a safe place or an inner resource, that sanctuary within where there's a felt sense of groundedness, safety, and calm. And we kind of unpack that. We do a couple of exercises. So you can start to recognize that you get to create this safe place, regardless of what's going on around you. There's somewhere inside when you connect to that allows your shoulders to drop, your belly to ease, and you'd be like, I'm safe. I'm okay. And now I can rest. Because I think most of us, for whatever reasons, are unable to rest based on we're still in that fear of fight or flee or fix, whatever your reaction is. And so when you begin to feel safe, you can begin to let go. So then we begin to understand that safe place is something that we're going to thread through the whole retreat. Each Yoga Nidra will have a little touch on that safe place because we want to anchor that. Then the next day is really about understanding how our emotions and feelings can rule us and take our energy away, and recognize that emotions are nothing more than just energy in motion. So we really drop into the body, recognize sensation as the doorway to being. Sensation is the doorway to being. And when you start to recognize, like, wow, I actually have a lot of sensation that I've paid no attention to. And now I'm like in an intimate relationship with the sensations, with my body. And now I've dropped beneath the mind and I'm into the source of the present moment. We start to unpack what emotions and feelings are holding you back from expressing yourself, or that you're scared to share. And then we begin to land those in a way that you can balance them in yourself. And as the retreat goes, we start to pull out little things that you start to say, like, that experience is not informing me anymore. This experience is informing me. And we start to begin to dissect a little bit about what isn't of service to you anymore and what can become of service for you. Creating intentions to begin to let go of the things that you cannot control or manage in your life, and have more faith and trust. And each day, a Yoga Nidra, more than one. At the end of it, you should have about 10 Yoga Nidras, which then, I'm going to be anatomical, will change the gray matter of your brain. You will have more discernment. Your prefrontal cortex will rewire. And all of a sudden, you're going to be like, I can see clearly now. I had to, sorry. But at the end, you're going to walk away. I think I've never, ever in these experiences of retreats, I've never had anybody walk away not feeling more connected to their true essence. That true, that sacred being that's inside of yourself. Doesn't mean your download's not going to come in and you got to go back to your wife, your husband, your kids, and your work, but you're going to have a different relationship with that. You're going to have some space to be able to make choices differently. We will even demonstrate how the choices that you've made got you here and how grateful we are that those choices were made. Now, you get to choose how to experience each moment from that point on. Now that becomes your work. All of those obstacles become opportunities. And all of a sudden, everything becomes something to experience. And that's the retreat. It's pretty special.
I mean, I'm in the presence of mastery, and I just love you so much.
I love you
And
too.
you have such a teacher's heart, and I think people can feel that. I certainly hope they can. And gosh, if someone stumbled upon this who has no idea what Yoga Nidra was or is, what Yoga Nidra is or who you are, this is such a great it's such a great explanation of what you're up to and how it impacts people, and I just love it. So thank you so much for taking time, John. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jake, for holding the space, for this incredible facility, and for what you offer. I mean, listen, to me, you're sacred for what you do and how you hold the space and how you give people opportunity to actually transform their lives. I mean, you're a gift, and I'm grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If you're listening and you want more information on John's retreat, you can go to imiloainstitute.com/John Vosler, Vosler. Tickets for this particular retreat, y'all, range from $3,600. Sorry, John, $3,600. Everybody, it's $3,600 to $5,200. Go to imiloainstitute.com/John Vosler, and you'll discover all the info that you need. Your retreat is happening March 25th to 30th. 2024 at Imiloa. Those are some good dates, John Vosler. Good for you for those dates. Are you happy with your dates?
I'm very happy because I was down there that same time this year and realized these are the perfect dates.
That perfect dates for a perfect retreat. Thank you, John Vosler.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate you. Take care.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Bye-bye.